Thank you for being with us today. We're moving to our last panel, panel 6, which is focused on security strategies in the Middle East. Dr. Junayd, the floor is yours, please.
Perfect. Thanks, Alexei, and ahlan wa sahlan bijamil hadul karam. Welcome everyone to our final session of the day. And as Alexei said, we're focusing on new security strategies and a bit about space domain awareness as well in the Middle East. So my name is Dr. Junayd Miah from Access Partnership, and I have the privilege of moderating today's discussion. So we've covered quite a lot of ground in the event so far, and this session kind of brings those different threads together with a focus on that security dimension, where space is really becoming an increasingly contested domain. Across the GCC now, there's a clear shift underway, I think, from accessing space capabilities to building and sustaining them. Organizations like NSG and FADA reflect that ambition. But the key question is whether this is translating into genuine sovereignty, or whether there's still a reliance on external partners that defines the model that is being taken forward. So today, we're going to explore a couple of topics. First, we'll explore what sovereignty really means in practice across assets, data tasking, and design authority, alongside how government demand, industrial strategy, and partnerships are shaping those outcomes. We'll also touch on the operational realities that we see today, like the GNSS interference that we have witnessed, and also the challenges with respect to building the talent that's needed to sustain these ambitions. And as a final reflection for the day, we'll also ask the panel what could still stand in the way of achieving a truly self-sustaining space security capability in the GCC. So before we begin in what is surely an incredibly exciting topic, I'd like each of the panelists to briefly introduce themselves, their organizations, and why this topic is so important from their perspective. So I think, Fawaz, if you don't mind going first, that would be great.
Thank you very much, Junayd. It's a pleasure to join the esteemed group of panelists. Assalamu alaikum, good afternoon. Quick introduction of myself. I am currently working as Vice President for Commercial Satellite Communication Business at New Space Group. I started my career in satellite operations, worked on a couple of satellite geostationary programs at UrbSat, which is, again, the pioneer satellite operator in the region. Then I spent a few years at North Star in Space in Canada, a startup that deployed the first of its kind commercial space-based capability for space domain awareness. And last year, I moved back to Kingdom and joined NSG current capacity. Quick overview of NSG. New Space Group was launched 2 years ago by the PIF as the National Space Champion of the Kingdom, with a mandate to deliver sovereign space capabilities and scale the space ecosystem in the kingdom and become a key regional and global space player. Today, we are working across 3 main domains within space: geospatial, satellite communications, and PNT. Actually, quite a lot has been happened in the last 2 short years since the New Space Group has been established. We acquired a couple of companies, starting with Taqniya ETS, now called New Space Group Geospatial. It has been the largest geospatial company in the region for over a decade. We also acquired the largest Earth observation data marketplace of 42 from Airbus last year, and launched a local Saudi marketplace based on that technology, enabling easy and secure access to Earth observation data within the Saudi ecosystem to support that growth and localization. In satellite communication, as a national space company, we were entrusted to operate the national assets, space and ground, to operate them and provide critical services to the government users in the kingdom. On the commercial side, one of the first verticals we entered was in flight connectivity business. There we acquired a French company, Display Interactive, to enable the multi-orbit connectivity with our global partners. You probably have seen some announcements, including recently the flag carrier of Kingdom, Saudia. We partnered with them proudly to provide the in-flight connectivity solution. Finally, in the PNT and IoT domain, we are developing a roadmap to deploy the infrastructure and services that meets the Kingdom's demand and enable the future growth areas under the Vision 2030, such as smart cities, autonomous mobility, and many more. And I'm sure we'll kind of touch base on these areas during the discussion. So again, it's a pleasure to join you all today and looking forward to our discussion.
Perfect. Thanks, Waz. Frank, if you wouldn't mind going next.
Sure. So, hi everyone. Frank Moyo. I'm the acting CEO at FADA. Started my career as a mechanical engineer in France at Thales Alenia, and spent most of my career at Beyond Gravity or RUAG Space at the time in Switzerland and in Europe, working through many programs of the UAE, of the European Space Agency, sorry, now relocated in the UAE, and worked on many projects. Worked also as part of RUAG Space. Was leading the Greenfield factory in Florida for the OneWeb constellation, and moved to the US after that, working in additive manufacturing for a couple of years, and then rejoined space, working at Rocket Lab as a program manager for the Global Star constellation, and finally moved here to the UAE, joining FADA, which is a space-focused company that has been launched in 2024 as part of Edge Group, who is one of the world's leading advanced technology and defense group. And our objective is mainly to achieve national sovereignty in space technology, and also to become a global provider in space services. And amongst other, we are currently the prime contractor of the SERP program, which is led by the UAE Space Agency. It's a SAR satellite. And we are also working on Zenith, which is a data orchestration platform, multi-sensor, multi-constellation, that will serve to support our future satellite and to support our ambition, as I mentioned, in space services. So happy to join the discussion today, and looking forward for the questions.
Thanks, Frank. And finally, Martin.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Hello, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Martin Smye-Rumsby from BAE Systems, and Junayd, great to be part of the panel, and thanks, Alex, for setting everything up. So yeah, I serve as the head of international space business development for BAE Systems. I've worked in and around defense and security for 2 decades now, either with space-enabled capability or indeed space capability itself. So I'm very familiar with the challenges that come with that. For those that may not be aware of BAE Systems, let me just give you a very brief introduction to our group. We have 2 large space divisions, one located in the USA, which has been around for about 7 decades and focuses historically primarily on the US space sector itself. And then for this discussion, we also have our UK division, which we call Digital Intelligence, which is where I'm speaking to you from. And we've been in the space sector as well for many decades, supporting things like the Tracking Telemetry Command Processor for the European Space Agency's ground station network. Importantly, for those on the call, and I'm sure this will come up, our digital intelligence portfolio sits outside of ITAR. That does not mean it's not export control. There is still UK export controls in place, but I know that's something that often comes up in discussions in the region. Perhaps if I just briefly zoom myself out for a minute and show you this image behind me, because picture paints 1,000 words. So what you're looking at here is cluster 1 of Azalea, our new radio frequency sensing and synthetic aperture radar product. The first cluster launched into the space just at the end of last year. And why you're interested? Why should you be looking at this? Well, you know, we've heard that space is congested and contested. We know this very much as a warfighting domain. So RF in space is not new. Radar in space is not new. But bringing these spacecraft together to formation fly, to process on boards, helps give us a richer picture of what's going on. And anyone, of course, that's read a newspaper knows it's a pretty tricky place out there. So by looking at a target at multiple points of the electromagnetic spectrum at the same time, we get a far more detailed understanding of what may or indeed may not be going on. So this is an example of private venture at BAE Systems. Yes, we're a government contractor. I think at last count, we have over 100,000 employees in 40 countries around the world. But this is private venture. This is self-investment for BAE Systems. So we do have that entrepreneurial zeal in our DNA. And I guess in terms of why am I interested in GCC region, why are we interested, why is space so important in a security point of view? Well, we've been in, for example, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for 60 years as a group now, 6 decades. Come back in, you've seen the spacecraft. We've also provided capability across our group to many valued and close partners across the GCC. And so for us, because space is a warfighting domain, it sits alongside land, air, maritime and cyber. And as a nation, if you don't have a robust space capability, it's a massive vulnerability for you. And we heard from Frank a moment ago talk about sovereignty, and I'm sure we'll get into that discussion. So thanks again, Junayd.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. And to be honest, we'll just get straight into that sovereignty discussion. So being blunt, sovereignty, I want to understand, is that something that is happening now in the GCC, or is that something we're still away from? I'm conscious, for us, we have NSG in the Kingdom, we have Fada, Frank, in UAE, and Martin, BAE stretches across multiple areas in the GCC. So I'm trying to get a general understanding, is there a transition that we're seeing from to sovereign space security across the GCC in your respective nations? Or is there still quite a few hurdles to go, given the long history that the GCC has in importing defense technology? So I'll probably, if I can ask that to Frank first, and then we'll go to Fawaz and then Martin.
Yeah, sure. I think it's a good question to start. And I would say from my perspective, it's definitely more than a reality. Especially in the UAE, I think the development of sovereign capability started quite some time ago. I think one of the first satellite that has been launched was before 2009 or something like that, built in the UAE. And yeah, we're talking about FADA, but if I look at the overall ecosystem in the UAE is quite rich. There are many players, Space 42, MBRSC, that have started before FADA, that have developed capabilities, launched and operated satellite. So we are in the middle of it, and I would say things are accelerating. It also depends what you define by sovereignty. Maybe we can touch a little bit about that later. But I would say the things are accelerating, definitely, because of the way the technology is, because of the geopolitical environment, and because space is becoming strategic. And you see groups like Edge that are industrial groups that are coming into the business and going, I would say, in the depth of the sovereignty. You can define sovereign as owning a satellite. You can define sovereign as building some or assembling some subsystems, or you can go deeper to manufacturing certain key components. I would say we are already at that level, and the things continue to move forward and to accelerate. So definitely a reality that we are living right now.
Okay, thank you, Frank. And we will dive into what we think sovereignty means in a sec. I just want to see, Fawaz, do you also see the same from the Kingdom? What's your take?
No, I agree. I mean, the shift started, let's say, a decade ago, from a region being traditionally security consumers to becoming sovereign security producers, if I can call that. For example, in the Kingdom, and this is happening in many sectors, and I believe Frank touched upon that in previous panel. For example, in the defense sector, as part of the Vision 2030 the target was set to localize more than 50% of the military equipment and services spending by 2030. And half of that was already achieved by 2024. So the shift is happening, it's measurable, it's visible. And I believe it's the same for space. Over the past several years, I think about a decade now, we've been seeing the creation and then evolution of the national institutions such as Saudi Space Commission and evolved into Space Agency. And 2 years ago, as NSG was established, and it was established under the PIF portfolio for a specific reason, to clearly set the national priorities and inject required capital to stimulate the sector, creating that demand signal to again and attract the private capital and resulting in growth of the overall ecosystem. And that increased the localization of the product, the services, the technology, and over time increasing I would say, organically as well and inorganically by acquisitions of technology, but increasing the sovereignty capabilities. And this is what our 2-year journey at NSG has been. I mean, we started building local capabilities, attracting international talent, blend that with the local to enhance the skill set, to set that solid foundation for future growth. Partner internationally where it makes sense, acquire strategic capabilities to accelerate that. For example, as I mentioned earlier, Up42 acquisition was a very good example because it gave us NSG or Kingdom a technology, a proven operational capability to quickly localize it to serve the national needs and then support the growth of the ecosystem by giving that access of the data, easy access to data to the system. So I agree with Frank. The shift is happening. It's visible. Progress has been made, and I think it's accelerating. But at the same time, it's a journey. Space is inherently generational industry. It takes time to build industrial base and capabilities. And I think in this journey, the next big milestone I see is in the region, which is now happening, is deepening the design authority of designing the systems, building them, manufacturing them in the region, also growing the local supply chains to support that ecosystem. So the indigenous capabilities become more and more sovereign. So I think that shift is happening. I fully agree with Frank.
That's really helpful. Thanks, Fawaz. And I think the supply chain one is really interesting that we'll have to get into in a bit. But Martin, obviously I'm checking here if you're echoing the same sentiment across, given that BAE, the prime that it is, across different parts of the GCC. Do you see that? Do you echo the same sentiment? But where is BAE also trying to, I guess, accelerate the sovereignty?
Yeah, thanks, Junayd. So yeah, I would echo the sentiment, and I would say that obviously we've got the two, preeminent actors within GCC representing the core, right? But the United Arab Emirates and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and that is very much just mirroring what we see broader, right? Which is for smaller companies in countries or in regions, they just don't have that same, sovereign industrial base, perhaps they would like. You might have parallels with Latin America, for example, Europe, etc. And I think this is a natural evolution with, countries with larger industrial bases. They have the wherewithal to invest in their people. They have the wherewithal and resources to invest in their industrial base and to sustain it. And so that's not surprising. And I think it was Rasha Al-Ahmad yesterday highlighted the role of the Aerospace Cooperation Group. I appreciate talking about the GCC here, but this is wider. And there will be countries within that wider grouping that will look to the UAE, Saudi Arabia for that regional leadership and sovereignty, perhaps not in the true sense of the term, but sovereignty on their terms, which is they would rather perhaps have a supplier from a country that's maybe closer to where they are. But from a BAE Systems point of view, localization and partnership very much are the way we operate. It's not just something we say, we've done it for decades. And we can point to, for example, the aerospace sector in Saudi Arabia and the fact that, over 80% of the workforce now in Saudi Arabia for BAE Systems is Saudi national. So, very, very much we see that happening where we do business. When we'll also have to identify the industrial base and supply chain, right? The reality is it takes a lot of time and investment to get to, making some of the sophisticated components. But we'll take partners where they are, and we'll respect what they're trying to achieve, and we'll work with them to increase their capabilities in accordance with their national visions, for example.
Okay, thanks, Martin. And it's nice to see like the depth and the heritage that BAE has in the GCC there. So there's a couple of things that are coming out that I will touch on later. I think supply chain is one of them. It's just going to creep up eventually. But I want to go back to Frank's point. Okay, what do we really mean by sovereignty? To me, and this is echoing a lot of pain that we've had in the UK and the Western world in general, sovereignty can mean a number of different things. I think initially people were thinking, well, we have to own the satellite, we have to build the satellite. And I think that immediately hits a brick wall when you necessarily can't have all the components to build a satellite in your country. So I'm really interested to see from your different perspectives, what do you think is the priority when it comes to calling, this is sovereign, we are sovereign in space? Fawaz, if I go to you first, that would be great. And then if we just go around the table again.
Sure. At NSG, we published a paper, I believe in late 2024, where we kind of developed a sovereignty classification framework based on the TRL concept in space from TRL 1 to 9. Here we identified 6, let's say, levels of sovereignty. Class or level 1 being like where you only have licenses and permits to operate, and increasing that to where you can have exclusive software or capacity as a reseller or value-added service provider, but based on others technology. And then you higher up where you own and operate this the command and control the system. Like you procure a satellite, for example, you own it, now you control it, you operate it, and you provide services. Traditionally, the region has been around this kind of sovereignty level where assets were owned by the governments or by the operators and being provided services. However, with the shift that we were talking in the previous is happening where now it's more building design authority is coming in, where people like can have knowledge and the skill set and training, for example, to not only design, model, stimulate, but also start manufacturing, assembly, integration. However, we're still, let's say, relying on the supply chains, mostly from partners globally. The next level we classified as where you start having custody of that supply chain and the whole value chain, including the launch systems, for example, which is a critical piece of being a space ecosystem, being able to launch something. And then, of course, the highest level we classified was where you have a fully resilient sovereign capability, full ecosystem with resilience, where, for example, few countries like US and China have that capability. So I think the traditionally in Kingdom, and I would say in a few other countries in the region, we were in middle sovereignty level, if I use the classification, whereas now that's been increased, or that's the push is to increase it, to have the design, manufacturing, assembly, integration, and also to start, I would say, having supply chains for at least critical components to enable the mission for national needs. So that's, I would say, where we are in the sovereignty level, if I define it in this way.
Yeah, I'd like to unpack that a bit more for us, if that's okay. So where do you think on that, that's a really nice tiered structure of, the different levels of sovereignty. Where do you think the ambition should be for the kingdom on that scale? Do you, noting I guess the most resilient top level one is very difficult to achieve. Let's just pick on a simple problem. Launch would be a fundamental blocker there. Where do you think is, for lack of a better term, good enough for the kingdom on that scale?
I would say having ability to design your national missions and build them here, assemble them, manufacture them, and also to start developing like manufacturing like the critical, let's say, if we talk about satellite communication, let's say antennas, radars, the RF component, for example, critical pieces of electronics to have that ability to manufacture that in-house and then be able to build and launch systems. Yeah, the launcher piece is of course a very critical capability that not many nations around the globe has. It requires a lot more capability in capex and development tracks. But I would say for Kingdom, that's where I think should be the minimum bar has been set now from the leadership. Yeah.
Thank you. And then Frank, I guess, do you also echo the same sort of, well, one, the structure that Fawaz had articulated there, and do you see the same sort of narrative in terms of the UAE would need to get to a certain bar, which Fada is helping with? And then just an additional question, what do you think about, from a defense perspective, I would say data also has to be quite sovereign asset, especially when we start talking about defense missions. Data becomes quite classified. So where do you see that as well?
Sure. Look, I fully echo what has been said, and I think the sovereignty is everything. Is owning the satellite. It's, as you mentioned, controlling the data, the tasking. But I would say essentially that's being able to design what you need based on your own requirements, because each time you buy something, usually you get something potentially average, something that is not necessarily that you have to fit within something, and you build a kind of patchwork where when you are fully sovereign, you can go to the bottom and have something that really fits your need, design exactly what you want, and be integrated into your entire system. So you have something which is also more efficient, more effective, and you control everything end to end. So you have the full integrity of your data, of your information. You have the ability to operate without being prevented, whether it is intentional from let's say a defense standpoint, but sometimes it can be also in the civilian application as part of the dual use application. You need to maintain your capacity to operate. And this is really related to basically to your country, to your environment, to how you operate. So that's what I would say is the sovereignty and what is relevant. You want to maintain your system. You want to be able to operate without any interruption, because everything that depends from the system now is very critical. Again, from a dual use perspective, security or defense. And this is, for instance, what we are doing in the SERP program. One of the objectives of the SERP program that we're doing with the space agency is exactly that: is to localize pretty much every step of the life cycle, from design, manufacturing, integration, testing, and operation. It goes also up to the deployment of our own encryption, so that make sure again that every data, every information that you transfer or that goes through your system is protected, and you guarantee the integrity of the information, which is essential for what you want to do downstream. To your question about what is the bar, I would say I would not define kind of a bar of a threshold. I would say it depends on your application. It depends on your system. I would say it's more related to what are the critical components, what are the critical infrastructure that are relevant for you, and this is where you need to try to develop those capabilities. Develop the knowledge to build, maintain, and operate or produce those components or infrastructure. This is really, I would say, therefore it's not really a threshold, but it's more defining what is relevant for what you want to do, and what can be what can be obtained from outside or procured or integrated, and what is the core that is non-negotiable, that is relevant for you to have your, let's say, minimum viable product or minimum viable service. to maintain what you're trying to get.
That's quite clear. And Frank, you mentioned about non-negotiables there as well. I think for what I've heard from yourself and Fawaz is we need to have the ownership of the design authority. We need to have specific ownership on certain satellite parts, and eventually, long-term, get ownership of the supply chain. Martin, I guess from a BAE perspective, where are you in terms of helping GCC countries with that non-negotiable piece of, making sure critical infrastructure, critical capabilities are secured for them, especially when you try and bring in experience that you have that BAE has from other parts of the world?
Yeah, thanks, Junaid. And it is a very crunchy question, I think, because it gets to the heart of the issue. So, as I previously alluded to, if I use the example of Saudi Arabia for a minute, we do focus on the people. So that is foremost, right? To Frank's point about MVPs, you can have a product tree and then you have a risk discussion about how much risk are you willing to take on a certain component? Do you have a diversification of supply? So if you can't get anything from supplier A, for whatever reason, can you switch to supplier B, to supplier C, etc.? So that's a critical piece of industrial sovereignty work that I'm sure is going on across the GCC. But in terms of BAE Systems, we put concepts like knowledge and technology transfer at the heart of our proposals because there may be some need in some parts of the region for a rapid, turnkey, quick turnaround, whereby absolutely the long-term aim is an increase in industrial and operational sovereignty. But you want something quickly, sometimes that's okay. But really for the enduring aspects, it's more about co-designing, co-creating, looking at concept of operations, and giving nationals of the respective countries a chance to learn. Because, in an age of large language models and free and open publishing, it's pretty easy to go find out some information, but to synthesize it and to bring in that feedback, that learning of, oh, I remember we worked on this mission, this is a problem. That's where the real value add of someone like BAE Systems comes from, because we've got that deep institutional memory of, oh, that went wrong, that mission, let's do something differently. So it's knowledge and technology transfer at the heart. And I think from an industrial point of view, it's a risk-based decision. How sovereign do you need to be? Do you start having to have your own mines so you can mine your ore to make the metal that you need? Do you need to go and get the right chipsets, etc.? So it's a risk-based decision. And I think for most countries, it's feasibly about what level of risk for what components are you comfortable taking, and starting from there. Because in some cases, it's just not economically viable to be truly sovereign where you need nothing from somebody else.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. I agree. It's that level that you have to go for. And I think everyone's touched on, I guess, a couple of blockers. So let's say blockers for now, that would impede each nation in the GCC from going to the next level of sovereignty. And one of them was supply chain risk. We've seen in Europe, for example, the impact that the Ukraine-Russia war has had on the supply chain for European Space Agency and others. How do you see the supply chain risk being an actual significant impact for the GCC today? For example, with what NSG is doing, with what FADA is doing, do you see supply chain as being an issue in your immediate future? Do you see that something that is more of a long-term issue that can be addressed in slower time? I'll open that question up to anyone.
So if I can chime in, for example, recently, speaking of supply chain and speaking of data supply, for example, recently we saw some of the commercial data supplying company on the Earth observation data have stopped supplying data in the region, right? And that, to me, is a good example of what we're talking about here, having custody of that supply chain, right? Either it's components, it's data, it's that feeds into operating and owning that mission, right? So I think the criticality is there, but also at the same time, it's a demand and supply thing, right? when the system, when the market is going to grow and the ecosystem will grow, and the manufacturing is start happening in the region, which is started happening now. So naturally, it will give the demand signal for other people to come in, start manufacturing components, piece parts. So that value chain or value chain would start increasing. So I would see it's happening more organically so far, but the change in the regional context probably is increasing, let's say, the emphasis of that to have more regional indigenous capability or within the countries, for example, to ensure that mission criticality or mission operations continue. The example I gave is one good example that we recently saw.
I guess on that front, do you see, with recent events, for example, is that just a reactionary process, what you said here, but in terms of like increasing the focus on building capability, finding alternatives for data, that's been a reaction result based on current events. Do you see that as something that would have occurred anyway, but at a slow pace, or do you think that what's happened now would be sustained in the long term?
I think it would have occurred anyway. This is, as we speak, it's a journey, and it's kind of the trajectory, the direction, the region, and especially the kingdom is taking. I would say accelerating that towards achieving those certain capabilities more quicker, more faster, and more locally as possible to ensure that if certain denial access to certain data or capabilities happen, then you have alternative fallback options within the country.
Okay, Frank, I would like to bring you in here. From Fada's perspective, we've spoken about supply chain. Has that, again, with recent events, have you been impacted by supply chain risks at all, or has the current events caused a greater focus from the UAE on Fada and what you can deliver for them?
I would say for Fada, we haven't been really affected, but like I think when we take the example of the images, yes, I think it has been an impact, but again, we were prepared in the sense that we had some core capabilities that allowed us to continue to operate, maybe not in an optimum way, but we were able to provide information. We were able also to continue to operate in the sense we could continue to develop and manufacture our satellite. But as Martin mentioned, each time you have a dependency, it's a risk. And either you do everything yourself and you are vertically integrated, which I think it's pretty much impossible. You have to manage basically your risk, and this is to, let's say, you have different ways to manage it. One is to tap into the existing ecosystem. And I would say this is now the nice thing also in space, and this is why space is becoming, let's say, or is developing a lot, is that a lot of component off the shelf can be used. I would say the technology is evolving very fast. What is produced in mass can be also now used more and more in space, and that I would say limits the dependencies, but at the same time I would say develop competition and promote capabilities. And we have the chance within Edge to be a large group from a technology standpoint, but also industrial standpoint. And again, we have the opportunity in FADA to tap into this ecosystem and to do kind of cross pollination. So we try also to maximize the reuse of components across systems, and even production capabilities, know-how. So we are, I would say, pretty well, I would say, operating, or let's say defined to have certain resilience, but you can't completely exclude it. And this is part of the strategy, as I mentioned, to identify what are the key component, the critical component or technologies or know-how that you need to have, and see how you can focus on those. And the rest, it's probably a low risk, but it's not a risk that you can't mitigate. You can just try to or eliminate. You can just mitigate that risk to the minimum you can.
And so, and just on that point, do you see with current events, you don't see any of the I guess the parameters that you mentioned there in terms of critical technologies and products that would need to be like non-negotiable. You don't see any of that changing at the moment, do you?
No, I think that there are a couple of things that we know are critical, and you know, like as usual, when you work with advanced technology, it is per se something which is not spread everywhere. So if you are the one that is developing this technology, you have an advantage on the other because you own it, you do it internally or within your country. So the dependency is low. If you try to adopt a technology which has been developed outside your company or outside your country, at the beginning the dependency is high, and this is what you have to work in order to reduce that dependency. So this is where I would say we put a lot of emphasis to lead on the development of the technology with the building blocks, whether they are technological, whether they are from the know-how or components that we have available, and try to build out of that so that we have something that is reliable, performant, but also I would say sustainable. And when we see something that is developed outside, then this is where we try to work collaboration, you know, partnerships in order to try to bring that knowledge in house.
Okay, that's clear. And there's a couple of things that I think we touched on as well with respect to workforce and building long-term expertise to really build that resilience picture. I'd like to get a better understanding of from yourselves and with respect to the countries that you're in, where the blockers are, where the priority needs to be placed in terms of upskilling the respective nations in meeting the expertise that's needed to deliver a resilient space sector. I want to bring in Martin first, because Martin, you've touched on how long BAE has been trying to do this in KSA. Can I try and get a bit of your thoughts in first, and then we can go to Fawaz and Frank?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know time is against this, so I'll be brief, which is, you know, programs of record are essential because one needs to have activity that can be done at each academic level. You know, if you're at doctoral level, you need projects, initiatives, you need laboratories, you need meaningful work to go and do. So GCC countries can signpost what their programs of record are, which of course then help investment decisions. And also, let's be very human about this. You know, for many people, they have to have a viable career. You know, some have the luxury of not needing that, but some do. So if they don't see a career in space because they don't see a program of record, it's very difficult for a country to make sure it's got people that can be principal investigators, chief engineers, you know, AIT leads, etc., because they'll go off and work in the financial industry, or they'll go and work in automotive, for example. So program of records, which, you know, it's not for me as a private, you know, representative of a private company to say, but that is probably the one key thing GCC countries could do to increase where they want to go to in space.
That's really clear, Martin. Fawaz, do you agree? Like, is this something that you see in the kingdom? Is the key thing?
Fully agree. I mean, I think the talent is a major factor. And it's not, as Martin was saying, it's not only technical, it's program managers, commercial leaders, legal, regulatory, policy experts, academia, and people who have lived through full mission cycles and can then own and evolve those systems to grow the ecosystem. In the kingdom, this has been one of the priorities came in under the Vision 2030 through the Human Capability Development Program. And in space sector, we've seen many initiatives from the space agency. CST, Mark Frank was talking about it. He was leading some of those. Recently, give an example, we were a proud partner with Saudi Space Agency and the CST, where we had a Space Up challenge, and there were like hundreds of applications. And many of them, and most were coming from local academia, local startups, small, medium enterprises. And that's kind of an ecosystem where you're connecting the talent and technology with the real market opportunities, all aimed at building the national human capital and capability. And I can, if you allow me to say that, having somebody been lived and worked in both West and GCC, I see that that this is the biggest opportunity for the region. The GCC has the young, educated, and very ambitious population. So if we can connect that, and if we can pool that, and then as Martin was saying, develop the career paths in that growing ecosystem, I think the human capital will become one of the largest, one of the region's strongest advantage in building that space sector.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I was hoping to get this question to Frank as well, but I'm conscious of time. And Frank, I think I know already with Fada and what you're doing already. You are driving the local workforce to become experts in the space sector through the programs and initiatives you have. So it is fantastic to see. I want to ask one final question to each of the panelists. Just a short, punchy answer would be great. Looking 5 years ahead, what do you think is the single biggest factor that could still prevent the GCC from achieving genuine self-sustaining space security and sovereignty? Martin, I'll go to you. Actually, yeah, I'll go to you and then Frank and then Fawaz.
Yeah, it's an absence of programmable records. That's the key thing that drives growth in the sector.
Perfect, thank you. Frank?
I would probably be bold, but I would say probably nothing or not much. I say there's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of initiatives, and I see a lot of traction. And I think if I compare maybe to globally in the world, I think the GCC, the area is one of the most active places in space, and the potential is huge, whether from an industrial standpoint, knowledge, resources, as we just mentioned. And I think there's pretty much nothing that prevent GCC to take a lead position in space activities.
That's perfect. Fawaz, do you agree?
I fully agree with Frank. I mean, there's a lot going on actually. It's getting to a point where we are lagging behind than what the market or the national needs are. So I think you're going to see in the 5 years the sustained growth going into the space sector.
Perfect. All right. Thank you all for joining on this panel. It's been great just going through this, and I know we've just only scratched the surface, but it's been really interesting hearing your respective thoughts. So that was me, Junayd Miah from Access Partnership, and again, thank you to the panel. Alexi, I'll pass back to you.
Thank you so much. We're actually finishing, and it's very sad because the conference was pretty cool, and we discussed lots of topics, and that's a sad moment to finish the conference. So let me okay. So thank you so much for being with us today. I want to thanks one more time Access Partnership for supporting us, and as well other partners, MBSAT, OrbitWorks, D-Orbit, Special Apply, and Saudi Space Community for supporting and for being a sponsor of this event. Junayd, are you with us? So maybe if you have some final words.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Alexi, and really thank you for organizing this event. It's just been fantastic to see how SpaceTech and Gulf has just delivered yet again. So I'll just summarize some of the key points that I've seen. Over the past 2 days, we've covered quite a lot of ground. I know we scratched the surface on some areas, but it's just been great to see that conversation going. And we covered things like strategic ambitions for national space programs around the GCC, to capital flows, shaping the next generation of capabilities. And then just now we were talking about the security aspects of space and how we need to really help different governments in the region confront them. Looking back at the conversations, really, what strikes me most, and I think we saw it, even coming out from our last session, was the shift from ambition to tangible progress. A couple of years ago, we heard a lot of big things coming, ambitious objectives from the GCC, and now we're actually seeing that's being converted into reality. And so it's great to see through these conversations that we had that's actually happening. Strategies are being written, investments are being made, and capabilities are now being built. There's a lot of hard work ahead, but it's great to see that direction of travel is clear and that momentum is present. And I think fundamentally what we're seeing now is that the GCC is not debating whether to be a space power, it's actually deciding what kind of space power to be. And the answers being developed here, like the GCC, will really extend far beyond the Gulf and impact globally. So great sessions, great event, and on behalf of the Access Partnership, I really want to thank the speakers, the panelists, and moderators who gave their time and expertise so generously. And above all, I want to thank everyone in the audience who joined us. The quality of any conference is ultimately determined by the people that attend that audience. So I think, thanks to SpaceTech and Gulf, we've really set a high bar. And I hope the conversations today continue long after we finish, either in bilateral calls or new partnerships, and the decisions used to the conversations that help to shape decisions in ministries, boardrooms, and control centers across the region. So that's me. Thank you again from Access Partnership, and until next time, shukran jazilan and wa ma salama.
Thank you so much.